The next use case we'll look at while we're in the Minitab Solution Center is from the automotive industry. They were looking at paint defects, but basically seeing a lot of defects in a specific area and wondering what sort of things were driving those defects. Is it the equipment itself? Is it the operator? Is it things like that we don't have a lot of control over, sometimes ambient temperature, humidity, that sort of thing. But we're going to do a little root cause analysis to determine what might have been causing the problem in this case. In this example, we'll go back to data prep. I actually want to bring in data that's coming from multiple data sources, and I'm doing that through Minitab Connect. Minitab Connect allows me to connect, again, to all kinds of data sources. We set up those connections, and once they're set up, we can also use Minitab Connect to do some data cleaning, but that data connection, once it's set up, it's good to go. And every time I go into this and tell it, let's go ahead and bring in the latest data coming in from Connect. Here it is. So this came in from several different databases. I am looking at, in this case, I'm looking to do a little root cause analysis on my defect data. So this time I want to open this data into a new Minitab project. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm opening into a Minitab. Here's my data. And one of my favorite predictive AI tools is, as I look at all this data, well, actually, before we get that, here's a little tip and trick for you. You can right-click on the worksheet tab down here and do things like save your worksheet, which you might want to do, export it as, say, a Minitab worksheet file, or CSV or Excel. So that's one thing you might want to do, is export your worksheet. That's just exporting that data out. But I also really like getting worksheet information. Oh, we can also sync our data connection. So if our data is updated, we're making sure we're getting the most up-to-date data. Here, I like the worksheet information down there. What this does is it tells me really quickly, I've got 1,000 data points in here. I've got one text column, and these are the columns I have. So, I have 13 potential different predictors in here, and I want to find out, can I find the root cause of a defect? Without having to do anything else, if you have the predictive analytics module, I love this, I can just right away discover the best model for actually determining what's driving defects. So my response column is my defective column. One is a defect, so I'm going to predict my defects. I'm going to throw in all my continuous or numeric columns. I'm going to throw in my categorical columns and just click go. Now this will take a few seconds, because what it's doing is running through all kinds of models to determine the best model for determining what is defective or not defective. So instead of having to do, just relying on regression, which is one of the models it will use, by the way, it actually is going to run through TreeNet models, binary logistic regression models, random forest models, with all different CART models, with what we call all different classification or tuning parameters, and finds the best model for us. Love that. If it's not a model I want, I can also choose an alternative. So this case, I believe it comes out with, let's find out, TreeNet did the best in terms of reducing misclassification. So, and it takes new data and tries to classify it as defective or non-defective. TreeNet won. So that was the model it picked. But if I wanted to, say I'm more familiar with logistic regression, I can select an alternative model right here and tell it I want a logistic regression model, and it'll create that for me directly from this output, which is great. Now, one thing I want to point out here is, all right, we have a lot of statistics on how good the model is, things like the area under the curve, which is really important. It can be hard to remember what these different things mean, but that's where Minitab AI comes in. So one thing we've incorporated into the Minitab Solution Center is Minitab AI generates a summary of your results. So it's not looking at your data, it's just looking at the results it sees in your output window, and it tells you here's some things to think about. Here's the how it chose the best predictive model. Here's information about how well the model's performing. It's telling us what things were the important predictors here, and just some things to be aware of, that you did have obviously, more good non-defectives than you do defectives. Let's hope so. And a little more about the model reliability. One thing I want to point out is my favorite part. I kind of skip a lot of this stuff. I use the AI summary to, allow me to kind of see what's going on quickly and go through this stuff pretty fast. But what I really like, if I'm comfortable with how the model's performing, is this relative variable importance, because it tells me, all right, you know what? I'm a little surprised. I thought it was going to be the environmental humidity and temperature that stood out, maybe in terms of the most important effects, but it turned out that it was the quality of my raw material and what production line I was running on. Right there, I now have opportunity for improving. That was an amazingly fast root cause analysis. And you can do this with hundreds of predictors, and it's going to run through all these possible models and really pick out the best. So here I can go down and actually look at what's going on. And it turns out the bad is on top because I'm modeling the probability of a defect. So defect probability is really high when my raw material quality is low. And then once I get my raw material quality up to, these were a rating from 1 to 10. Once I get to about a 7, you know what? My defect rate drops quite a bit. So if I can just get that quality of my raw material better, now I know what to focus on. Maybe it's a supplier issue. I can start looking at that problem, because that will greatly reduce my defects. I also see that production line efficiency had something to do with it. So I might want to, when I'm not running efficiently on my production line, then I'm seeing more defects. So I want to actually look into that too. And then the rest, I'm not going to worry about right now, because, Pareto principle says, hey, let's focus on the top bars. Now, some other things I can do, and this is kind of new, we implemented at your request. We got a lot of customer requests for a response optimizer within the predictive analytics module. So we have that. I want to minimize my defects. I can get my interactive response optimizer that you're all used to in the Minitab desktop product to actually play with different settings, maybe do somewhat of a simulation with different settings and see how they impact my results. So I got my response optimizer here. It is my interactive tool again. What happens if the best raw material I can get is only a quality of 6, right? I can actually, it told me my best result, but now here's maybe a more practical result. I don't care about the overall desirability right now, so I'm going to turn on options and actually turn that row off so I don't have to look at it. And I'm really just going to look at my defectives. So I want to minimize defectives, right? So I can see how I move these lines to minimize my defect rate, right? Down to 6% here. These other variables, remember, weren't that important. So we see kind of flat lines here. The two that really mattered are much bigger lines. Now, if I can't get that good of raw material, so my raw material is at 6, can I play with any of these other triggers to actually reduce my defects? Well, maybe here, maybe I can get this changed a little bit. So think about a machine with different settings. I can move these settings around and see how do I reduce my defects, because there's certain settings I might not be able to control. Maybe I couldn't control my raw material quality for that batch. So are there other settings I can adjust? Or the temperature is going to be high, so what other settings can I adjust? So really great way to play around with different machine settings in particular, and then you find something you like, click the predict button, and it gives you nice prediction statistics for, at these settings, here's my predictive probability of a defect, right? It's at these settings, which aren't great, almost 15%, and that had to do with my raw material quality being so low. And, if I can just get that raw material quality back up, then I'll get a much better result. So predict, get that raw material quality up, and guess what? Now my predictive probability should have improved. I must not have improved enough of some of the other settings here, but yeah. But I can play with that and find my sweet spot for improving my process. So a great way to just understand what's going on with your data, getting a little help from Minitab Generative AI on interpreting your data, and then also being able to now use an optimizer to actually find optimal values or optimal responses. The one last thing I do want to say, I'm going to turn my navigator on and okay, we are in the best model. One of the things you can do with these predictive models, if you have the model apps option, you can send then to Minitab Model Ops, which is what I would do. That would allow me to operationalize this model. So I could actually put this model into my kind of production sequence to get alerts when I am facing a high likelihood of a defect. So it's amazing what you can do with predictive AI.